how to find foreclosures to flip for a profit. What are we going to be covering? REOs and how they relate to foreclosures, the foreclosure process, where to find foreclosures, how to bid in auctions, and so much more. So I recognize that there aren't a ton of bank-owned homes right now, but with mortgage delinquencies and 90 days and that type of stuff coming, there is going to be some more bank-owned homes. So once a bank does a foreclosure, they actually own the property, which is called real estate owned. They call this a non-performing asset. It's an asset because they can sell it and get money, but they're not making any money and it is sitting there, which is called an REO property. So this is after the foreclosure has actually occurred. REO stands for real estate owned. Banks consider REOs non-performing assets because they're not making any money, and banks are motivated to sell these properties, but they're not going to be stupid. They're just not going to give them away. REOs can hurt the bank. It can limit their lending power. It can put them in trouble with stress tests, which is a new thing since 2008 to make sure they could handle something like that happening. My property where I actually bought a property that the bank financed for me and to get off their books as an REO. It's been a couple years, but it was a great deal. Evictions. Many times the bank has to evict the former owner. If they stay there, you have to go through an eviction process. If the former owner doesn't leave after the property is foreclosed, then we're required to do an eviction. The bank has to do that eviction. So the bank does this assessment when they're looking at the property and they're saying, hey, what's the property worth the way that it sits? What's the property worth fixing up? They run a formula to see if it makes sense to fix it up or sell it as is. If there's some big concerns, they may just say, nope, we're going to do this because we don't want to have any problems later. And most banks work with an REO agent, also known as real estate owned agent. This is an agent that specializes in REO properties, meaning they have contacts to do repairs and maintenance and that type of stuff for the bank. As is condition, banks do sell properties in as is, where is condition. Even if they fix it up, they're going to do that. But the as is, where is shouldn't scare you. It's basically just saying, we haven't lived there. We don't know anything about it. We don't want you to come back and sue us later. That's basically what that means. But just because it is as is, where is, you can still do a full home inspection. Like that doesn't change you from doing a full home inspection. So you can do the inspection so you're aware of any problems that are there. That bank's just saying, we're not going to do anything about it. Now, they may negotiate when you say there's some major problems, we need a better price. They may do that. So don't forget your second negotiation. REO agents assign the property long before the home is on the market. So an REO agent, before it even gets listed, it gets assigned to them. They're typically going there, getting values, taking pictures, and helping the bank make this assessment. Now, REO agents are required to give all offers to banks. If the offer is $1, they're still required to give that to the bank. But if you have a jump start, if you know that a house is coming on the market and you know the REO agent, maybe you're able to take a look at it and you can give them an offer even before it hits the market, or the day it hits the market, you could have a jump start there. So take an offer to the bank on a deal that they're going to fix up and say, hey, just sell it to me as is. With my previous house, it was an REO agent friend of mine that let me in. And so that has been really helpful as well. So do you know any REO agents? There are networks. How do you find these guys? Well, REOnetwork.com is going to have a list of agents. REObroker.com. You've got LinkedIn REO Network. You've got REO Pro Network. REO networks are typically memberships where some REO agents will actually pay a membership fee. Their goal is to help these agents actually get more business. Okay, that's the idea here. So market directly to the banks is not really useful. I've done this. I haven't had great success. I have worked with some of the local credit unions, but so far it hasn't really turned into a deal. So it's something, if you are wanting to work with a bank, I'd suggest local credit unions or small municipal banks that are just kind of in your area. Once you're talking about Chase, Bank of America, any of the bigger banks, it just is not going to make sense. You're just going to have a hard time getting somebody on the phone because they're going to follow a process. HUD homes. I like HUD homes. One of my very best rental properties I bought, still own it today. I bought it from HUD. FHA, VA homes are sold through a HUD website. They give homeowners the first shot, the first 10 days or 7 days. And then after that, they let investors come in and make bids afterwards. If you want to find out about those HUD homes, you can go to HUDhomestore.com, HUDhomestore.com. I want to talk a little bit about auctions. What is an auction? When a house is being sold in a bidding situation is what an auction is. So the house will be sold to the highest bidder if there's different types of auctions, okay? There's absolute auctions. It'll sell for the highest price no matter what. Then you've got reserves, which will be sold if it meets the minimum reserve. So basically that could be a disclosed or an undisclosed reserve, which says, hey, if we don't at least get this, we're not gonna sell the property. It's typically undisclosed. Okay. Ways that you can bid on auctions. You can bid online, you can bid in person, you can bid over the phone. It varies based upon the auction rules. And I should say there's two different types of auctions. You've got the REO auctions or the foreclosure auction, which I don't recommend you bid at. And then you've got banks that are doing what are called private auctions, and those you definitely can. The reason with the courthouse steps is you want to get title insurance. You want to make sure that you have seen the property, been inside the property. You want to make sure that you're getting all those types of things, and you're not going to get that when you go through a foreclosure sale and buy that through the attorney or the trustee of the bank that's actually doing the foreclosure. Things can be auctioned, cars, equipment, personal property, real estate. That happens all the time. Like I said, there's two different types of auctions. You've got the public and the private auctions. I have purchased properties from both of those. In the public auction, it's your typical foreclosure auction, which basically the highest bidder, trustee or court, gets it. There is a reserve. The bank is the one that owns the loan. They set that reserve. They can set it for less than what's owed to them, and they can go up to what's owed for them, and there's a real loan there. So the bank can have a starting price and then bid against others until the reserve is met, or can keep bidding, right? So they can just keep going and say, this is what we want until we get to that. The highest bidder is going to get that as long as it meets the reserve, which sometimes the highest bidder is going to be the bank if it doesn't make the reserve. Foreclosure auctions are going to vary by state, but most states you're going to need $5,000 to $10,000 cashier's check. You actually make that cashier's check out to yourself, and then you endorse it over to the attorney or to the court if you happen to be that winning bidder. In most cases, you're required to have cash within 24 hours. There's a few exceptions to this where you have a little bit longer, but for the most part, you got to have cash 24 hours. You're not able to get inside the property. The sales are typically at the courthouse steps, and the county courthouse experience is really shocking. You basically, it's outside and it's raining, or maybe it's inside in the entryway. You flip over a garbage can and say, this is the sale for 123 Main Street. That's what it's like. You would be surprised what that looks like. And that's the foreclosure sales. Now, some of them happen in a courtroom, but for trustee states that aren't judicial foreclosures, non-judicial foreclosures, that's how a lot of those work. So it's not some nice room. It's not that type of stuff for your non-judicial foreclosures. Private auctions are different. Private auctions is a private company or a seller that's going to be auctioning. This isn't confused with, you shouldn't confuse it with private invitation. It doesn't mean you can't go or you have to be special and invited. They want anyone to go. But what it means is it's owned by a private company, not that it's private and you can't go to that. Typically, a bank wants to get and unload properties to lighten their REO or real estate owned, that non-performing asset. Bank requirements are going to be, banks are required to only have so much REOs on their financial sheet. If not, they can be in violation. They can hurt their ability to get more money. Mortgage insurance, on most loans, banks are insured for major losses, so they might take some loss, but the rest of the loss is typically covered by an insurance. So that makes it a little bit easier on them to get rid of some of these properties rather than hanging on to them, maybe a little more motivation. The money will typically be paid back by the borrower. The borrower will then step back, and the bank will take the majority of the losses that come there. And basically, banks are motivated. They don't want to have these. They don't want property. They want their money back, and they want a few more friends. Banks and some private sellers hire private companies to conduct these types of auctions. Write these down. You're going to want to go check out these sites: hudsonandmarshall.com, williamsauction.com, auction.com, and there's a bunch, conciergeauctions.com. There's other private auction companies that you can actually look at, from Hubzu to Property Auction to Bid for Asset. Just do a Google search and see what comes up. But these ones I would definitely check out and see what's there, see when those auctions are. They have moved more to an online auction, so that can get you, you should be looking at that every single week. Like, is there stuff that's coming up? You should be looking at HUD Home Store every single week. You should be looking at the private auctions every single week, and seeing if there's something that jumps out to you. Here's the good news with private auctions. Unlike public auctions, you get full title insurance. You get an inspection period. You're able to get in the home and actually look at it, where if it's a foreclosure sale, the bank doesn't own the property yet. The prior owner does. They own the property after they do the foreclosure sale. But even then, they have to get the owners out of the property, which lots of times includes an eviction. 30 days or so to close, so you have some time to make that happen. Be really careful with auction hype. It happens. It's happened to me. Decide what your highest and best offer is. Don't go up against it. Don't go further than it. This is legal, where they can have people that are driving up prices to hit that minimum bid. So just be careful, because there is hype in these types of things. And it's easy to overbid, so just know your numbers. Decide that before you go in. See the property before the auction. You can determine the cost for the rehab. You can determine the final bid price, so you make sure you don't go over on that. And most people will overpay on properties for auctions if they don't have their maximum allowable offer. So don't be that person that just gets caught up in the frenzy. Subject to bank approval in most private auctions, even though you're the high bidder, you're not going to be awarded the property right then. It's going to be subject to bank's approval. Usually it takes a week or two for the bank to approve or deny that. And then if you are the winning bidder, you can move forward. And if not, they try and sell it another way or put it back in the auction. The bank will have a couple of weeks to approve it. That's usually what happens here. So action steps you can take. You can look at those auction companies for properties that are in your area, and you should be doing that every single week. You should be Googling and find regional or state-specific auction companies. You should be checking that every single week as well as the HUD Home Store for those FHA and VA foreclosures. Once you close it, it turns into your typical deal. Like, nothing else changes. You get your loan, you do your rehab, you get the property sold. Like, that's the typical stuff that happens, just like you would do with any other type of deal. The auction shouldn't throw you off. So let's talk about what we have learned today. You can work with REO agents to find foreclosures before anyone else. We've talked about you can bid at auctions for foreclosure properties, private auctions. There's private and there's public. We recommend the private, not the public auctions, is our recommendation.